Hello, and welcome back to the Evidence Locker. I'm your host, Shay. Today, we are covering the strange case of Tiffany Valiante. Tiffany Valiante was born March 3rd, 1997. She was the youngest child born to Stefan and Diane Valiante. From a pretty early age, she was very athletic. She was super good at softball and volleyball, and she played all throughout high school, and she was really popular and well liked. And not only was she good at sports, she earned a scholarship to attend Mercy College in New York beginning in the fall of 2015 due to her athletic abilities. So excited about the opportunity to play sports in college, and she was planning on studying criminal justice. And while she was ecstatic at the idea of going to college and starting her own life, tragically, that was cut short. 2015, Tiffany went to a graduation party at the home of her cousin, and his home was just across the street from her family home. And so they spent the day hanging out. She was swimming with him, hanging out around the family pool, and the party started to wind down in the early evening, a little after sunset. So she went home to shower and change, and she had plans to go out. So, as the party's wrapping up, Tiffany's mom got a phone call from one of Tiffany's friends. And this friend said, I have to speak to you right away. And so the mom was like, okay, what's wrong? So this friend tells Diane, I'll meet you at your house. So Diane and her husband say goodbye to their family and head home. And when they get there, Tiffany's friend and the friend's mother were sitting in the driveway in the car. And they both got out as soon as they saw Tiffany's parents, and they seemed pretty upset. Apparently, Tiffany had taken her friend's debit card and used it without permission. Parents go in, they get Tiffany, they're like, what the hell's going on? She denied ever using it and said, I didn't do it. So after this, Tiffany's friend and the mom end up leaving, and that was that. Diane was like, maybe they were in Tiffany's car together. Maybe the friend dropped the debit card or something. And maybe it's just in Tiffany's car accidentally and they went to check it. As Diane and her daughter are checking the car, she saw Tiffany trying to hide the girl's card in her pocket. So at this point, Diane is super pissed. She's like, not only did you steal someone's debit card, you lied to me about it, which makes me look like a liar defending you. Diane went back inside to get her husband, and she explained what happened, and they went back outside together to confront Tiffany and talk to her about it. And Tiffany was just gone. She had been in the driveway, and Diane was only inside for a few minutes, but now they can't see her anywhere. Not only was Tiffany gone, her car was still there. So there isn't many places she could have gotten on foot in this town, and they were a little concerned because she wouldn't have just left. They said she's not a kid who just stomps off in the night and just leaves. Mom also said this wasn't an explosive argument by any means. They weren't screaming and yelling and all that. They were just kind of disappointed, like, what the hell is going on? You're almost an adult. You shouldn't be doing this. They ended their driveway and looked down the street, and they couldn't see her anywhere. Like, she wasn't anywhere within eyesight, and she wouldn't have been able to get that far in a few minutes to the point where you couldn't see her on the street. So they were thinking maybe a friend picked her up. Tiffany had a severe phobia of the dark. Yes, she was 17, but she had a nightlight. She could not be outside alone after dark. So they definitely didn't think she had walked off on her own, as it was already dark out. Diane and Stefan walk back across the street to her cousin's house to see maybe she came back to the party, maybe she was hanging out with family just trying to blow off some steam. But no one at the cousin's house had seen Tiffany either. They hadn't seen her since she left the party earlier that day. And so she's just thinking, there's just so many friends and family in this area. She's just, trying to cool off. She's probably hanging out with somebody. They tried to call her phone a bunch of times, but they never got an answer, so they're thinking she's angry at them and just not wanting to pick up. But that doesn't make a ton of sense because, like I said, it wasn't a huge explosive argument. It was a conversation, and they don't know where she could have gone because they called around to her friends and family and no one had seen her. They called her sisters, Jessie and Crystal, and her uncle, Michael, who was a former New Jersey state trooper. Getting concerned because they call all the friends of hers that they know of and no one's seen her. It's dark out. She's terrified of the dark. There's no way she's just walking around blowing off steam. So they split up and drive around the neighborhood looking for her. And they didn't see her anywhere, which doesn't make sense because they've been driving around for 2 hours at this point. A little after 11 p.m., her dad went back to the house and was walking up the driveway, and he saw something in a pile of leaves at the end of the property, and he bent down to look, and it was Tiffany's cell phone. Tiffany's dad said he panicked immediately. Like, he said Tiffany never went anywhere without her cell phone. She was a typical teen in 2015. And Diane said she even bought a waterproof case so she could bring it into the shower. So there's no way she would have just thrown it on the ground and left. Half hour of finding it on the ground, they called the police. The family continued to search on their own for Tiffany as well, but they found no sign of her besides the cell phone, and they are searching up to 4 miles from their home. A few miles away, the New Jersey Transit Police had started to investigate an accident on the Atlantic City rail line. According to the student engineer who was driving the train, they had been traveling to Atlantic City from Philadelphia at 80 miles per hour and had reached mile marker 45 when a pedestrian, quote, dove in front of the train from an east to west direction. At the time, they were unable to identify the person because of the impact of the train. It had crushed her skull and destroyed any identifying features. And also, what they could see, they were confused by, because this victim was dressed only in underwear, so they didn't have any identifying clothes on or a wallet or anything. All they knew was it was a person and that they were almost nude. They removed the remains from the scene and took them to the medical examiner's office. And at this point, they didn't even know if it was a man or a woman, really. They assumed a woman from the underwear, but they couldn't quite be sure. And they believed it was a suicide initially because of what the student engineer said about someone jumping in front of the train. I believe it's a suicide. They don't treat it like a crime scene. They don't tape anything off. They don't try and gather evidence. But you should treat it like a homicide until you 100% know it's a suicide, in my opinion, because now the scene's able to be contaminated. You know, anyone can just walk on through. Early hours of the next morning, the Valiante family is getting even more concerned and slowly becoming even more panicked. Michael, Tiffany's uncle, received a call from a former co-worker asking him to come down to the medical examiner's office. The body was discovered. The New Jersey Transit officers contacted police and they asked him, are there any missing persons reports that have been filed recently? And that's when they heard that Tiffany Valiante had been reported missing. So because of that, investigators believe they were extending a courtesy by contacting Michael first. Michael goes down and determines that the remains were in fact Tiffany. Diane said, I remember a car pulling in and my brother-in-law got out of the back seat. I heard him say, Tiffany got hit by a train. And my 2 kids were just screaming and my husband is screaming. And I'm like, what did you just say? They had just told her she was hit by a train, but they didn't tell her anything else. Quote, we thought she was in the car with someone that the car got hit. Like, they don't even know that she got physically hit by a train. The next morning, the family finally learns the actual details, but it wasn't from police. They had to learn it from the media. The press reported Tiffany's death as suicide within hours of it happening, and Diane said, my husband called the paper to tell them that was wrong. But, of course, they don't listen to them. They're the family. You never want to believe your loved one commit suicide. Call the New Jersey Transit Authority, and they confirmed that less than 24 hours after Tiffany died, they labeled her death a suicide, and that was the end of it. No investigation involved. You may not always know that you're suicidal, but your friends may be more likely to know. And Tiffany's friends were also just, insanely bewildered that her death was ruled a suicide. They had never seen any indication of depression or self-harm, which, true, your friends may not even know, but they saw her every day. They said they never thought it would turn out like this. Though the official ruling was suicide, there is at least circumstantial evidence to support foul play, which we will be looking into this episode. 4 days after her death, investigators brought in bloodhounds to track Tiffany's scent in an effort to find additional details, such as where her other clothes were and what route she would have taken to the train tracks. The dogs tracked her from the end of the Valiante's driveway along a rocky, overgrown wooded area along the train tracks, and then the trail ended where her body was found. And despite walking the entire route that Tiffany allegedly took, they were unable to locate any of her clothing. Her family felt that even if she was feeling suicidal, there's no way she would have walked all that way in the middle of the night with her extreme phobia of the darkness, especially through the dense woods. 5 days later, the medical examiner labeled the cause of death suicide, and Diane and Stephen had Tiffany's remains cremated, which Diane did later say was the worst decision of her life. Sadly assumed that the investigators had already taken any evidence needed from her daughter's body, which they did not because they did not believe a crime had been committed. After more searching, investigators did find her shirt in the woods nearby, but it was only her shirt, and they found her shirt next to an axe with red markings on it. Already doubted the suicide theory, but the circumstantial evidence was piling up. Jessie, Tiffany's sister, said the family found it impossible to believe that late on a summer night she would suddenly leave, discard her phone, and walk from the home. Quote, in Mays Landing, more than 4 miles to a remote, thickly wooded section of railroad tracks, and along the way remove her shorts, headband, and sneakers before stepping onto the tracks and in front of a train traveling 80 miles per hour, that doesn't make any sense. Like, when you really lay it all out like that, you're like, what's the point of taking off the clothes? At this point, Diane started going on long walks just trying to clear her head and, of course, trying to process her grief. As walks through the woods, she found the rest of Tiffany's clothing, and it was in the woods leading towards the tracks. Under a tree, about a dozen feet from the tracks, when she got closer, she saw it was Tiffany's shoes. She said, quote, they were neatly lined up as though they'd been placed there carefully. With the shoes, Diane found Tiffany's headband. Strangely, though, she also found a large keychain and a sweatshirt she had never seen before. It had already been searched by investigators, so either they didn't search well enough, or somebody placed these items there after her death. Should note that while the items were found a dozen feet from the tracks, it was a mile from where Tiffany had been struck. So she would have been walking for a mile barefoot in the woods. Which doesn't make sense because Tiffany's feet in the examination were clean and had no injuries or cuts. Woods at night over rocky terrain, barefoot for a mile to a mile and a half, she would have had some pretty bad cuts, scrapes, and most importantly, dirt on the soles of her feet. Anne and her husband notified the police, thinking this evidence would be enough to prove against the suicide theory. However, before any testing could be done, transit detectives misplaced the keychain and the axe. They have no clue where it went, and it's never been found. Tiffany's shirt had been improperly stored and grown mold. It was deemed completely untestable. Montes felt that this only confirmed their suspicion that somebody was hiding something, because in his initial statement to the police, the student engineer told the detective, quote, as he approached mile marker 45, the pedestrian dove in front of the train. Just that Tiffany jumped and gave the train no time to stop, because she, quote, dove in front. But in later interviews, the student engineer described Tiffany as standing on the tracks, and that is something very different. He said these all in one sitting and at different times. But when investigators examined the area from which she supposedly jumped, they found it was covered with trees and a built up stone railway grade, which would have made jumping very difficult. The student engineer also said he used the train's horn multiple times before the impact, but Tiffany didn't make any attempt to move. However, investigators checked the train's black box and it showed that the horn had not been used at all, and he said several times she didn't move. I didn't understand why he would lie about that. That's not something to lie about. It's not his fault either way if he hit her, whether she was standing on the tracks or jumping in front of it, if she was too close for them to stop fully. So that didn't really make sense to me. Easier is it was later found that moments after Diane went inside to get her husband, a hunter's camera captured Tiffany walking down the driveway, phone in hand. And when Diane came out of the house, her daughter was gone. This was a trail cam a little ways away from the driveway, probably 10 or so feet, and Tiffany's phone was in her hand when she was passing it. So how did the phone get back to the Valiante's driveway? The family wanted the case reopened, and they asked the medical examiner's office to change cause of death from suicide to undetermined. However, the ME said no. So, in July 2016, they reached out to a law firm that was a local agency who agreed to take the case pro bono. After 2 years of fighting, the Atlantic County Medical Examiner's Office was brought in to review all the information collected, and she agreed that the death certificate should be amended. The transit police also allegedly falsified records of her having a distraught mental state, and when asked later on, the individuals who supposedly said this in interviews said they had never said that, or even that they were never interviewed. Viewing the information, a separate forensic scientist determined the victim was likely sleeping or dead already when struck by the train. He even said, quote, "I have never seen another case mishandled like this." The area where the axe and Tiffany's shirt were discovered was a known party spot with a local frat house, which isn't any proof necessarily, but it is interesting. I should also note that at the time, this particular frat house was under investigation for numerous sexual assaults. After her death, a local Wawa employee told investigators, quote, he overheard a group of teenage boys talking about Tiffany having been kidnapped at gunpoint, humiliated, forced to strip down to her underwear, and driven to the train station by her abductors. I personally believe this case was foul play. I don't know if it was the frat house or someone else, but someone took advantage of a young girl outside alone at night. They likely abducted her, sexually assaulted her, and threw her body in front of the train in order to get rid of any evidence. Especially if an axe was involved. You wouldn't notice axe markings after someone's skull has been crushed by a train. Honestly, the reason I most believe in the foul play is because of how her clothes were scattered about, and they weren't even on the path that scent dogs tracked her taking that night. So it means either someone else disposed of her clothes, or they were thrown from a car, which wouldn't make sense with the suicide theory. Let me know what you guys think. Was this a suicide? Is there something more that needs to be looked into? Thank you for listening to this week's Evidence Locker. I'm your host, Shay, and this is edited by my husband, Toby. Stay curious, stay safe. Join us next week as we open another locker.